Good morning, everybody. Good morning, welcome. Happy Easter, the most awkward holiday there is for Unitarian Universalists all around the world. So welcome. This morning, we're going to dive into some science about rocks. We're going to use that as our metaphor for understanding what's hard to explain, what's hard to put into perspective. The first part of this service is called sand. According to the story, the rock was rolled away, and the women went in, and there was no one there. Now, that was a big rock in that story of Jesus leaving the tomb, however he might have. The rock was huge, and the only time in my life I've ever seen anybody move a really big rock, which was when I was about 7 or 8 years old. When I was 7 or 8 years old, we didn't have the money to go to the beach one summer, so we went to the river. And it wasn't a campground. It was us dragging tents in a wagon back to the creek, back to the river, and my father building us a campsite. Now, the rocks that he moved to build the stone table and the fireplace weren't around and arranged at the bottom of the hill, so my dad and his friends jumped on the rocks and rode them down the hill. And I will never forget rock racing. I guess not, right? That is a terrifying idea. Your father riding or surfing down a hill on a rock. That's the only way I've ever really seen big rocks be moved. In this church where I serve, we have a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. It's our fourth principle. And it can feel a little challenging on Easter for Unitarian Universalists. We can be challenged by the certainty many around us feel about the death and resurrection of Jesus. Today, we're going to talk about what the rock has to tell us in this story. Our opening words are from Lisa Fishbeck. It's called "It Began with a Stone." When some people think of Easter, they think of a bunny rabbit, or others would point to other fertility symbols and signs of spring forth out of the ordinary, the plain, the seemingly dead, butterflies, flowers, and the likes. Christians might think of the empty cross or of a cross with flowers on it, the instrument of shameful death transformed into something else. But in the midst of those other things, I think about the stone, not a symbol of the resurrection itself, but as a means of reminding us to open ourselves to the journey, to persevere with understanding, knowing and embracing that life-changing, world-shifting, reality-jolting events happen. If we want to persist with the Easter Bunny, perhaps in addition to jelly beans and fertility symbols, the Easter Bunny might start delivering geodes. Stones that look like one thing, plain enough, but on closer inspection, with a bit of perseverance and some hard knocks, reveal an entire, more glorious dimension. The stone in the Easter story reminds us that there is more going on in this resurrection event than any of us first can grasp or understand. The stone reminds us that with God there are possibilities beyond logic, beyond our wisdom, beyond our puny known world. The stone reminds us in the midst of death we are in life. And now it's time to light our chalice, and we light chalices all around the globe this morning to symbolize the beginning of our service. Thank you, Judy, for coming up and lighting our chalice. Please join me for our chalice lighting words. In our chalice lighting words. In the light of truth, in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. Our opening song this morning is number 38, Morning Has Broken. Please rise in body and or spirit and join us both here and at home as we sing our opening song. So, what do you think? Is the jar full? My husband's kind of optimistic about what full means. This jar looks pretty full, doesn't it? Yep. There's some big rocks in this jar. They represent the big stuff in our life. Family, ethics, beliefs, things that make us who we are. And they fill our jar up, especially if our jar is our life. But other things come into play, right? We have distractions. We have jobs. We have friends. We have family. We have extended family. We have the things that worry us. And those are smaller, like the gravel. And so even though these rocks fit in the jar, there's room for more. And our lives get surrounded by the little stuff. The stuff that annoys us and distracts us. And pretty soon, our jar is really full. What do you think now? How full is the jar? Almost full. Almost full. So there's more to the world than just our direct world, the things that we interact in. There's things like worrying about what the latest fashion is or who might run for city government. We worry about what's for dinner. We worry about if our friends like us. We worry about little things, and they're kind of gritty, and they kind of wear on us, don't they? And they fit in this jar too. I think the jar is getting full. I bet we can fit a few more annoying things in there, right? So, this teaches us a lot of things. First, it gives us a cool metaphor to kind of look at and identify with today. Second, it tells us that if the jar is your life and you fill it up with sand first, you're not going to have room for the big things. You're going to be distracted by the sand, by the little gritty annoyances in your life. Or you could fill it with gravel, and you maybe wouldn't pay attention to what you needed as a person. But here's the problem. If we just fill it with one thing, our life is kind of boring. We need the gravel and the sand and the friction to help us think differently about things. This story was traditionally told by a philosophy teacher. And what he said was the jars signify one's life. The rocks, the important things. If the pebbles and sand were lost, the jar would still be full of your life and still have meaning. Pebbles, other things that matter in your life, such as your work, school, and house, these things often come and go and are not permanent or essential to your overall well-being. And finally, the sand represents the remaining small stuff and material possessions in your life. These things don't mean much to your life as a whole. They are likely done to waste time or to get small tasks accomplished. So the man that wrote the story about this said the original philosopher was off a little bit. Because if you ignore the sand, you can get buried in it, right? You can get buried in all the little stuff around you. And if you ignore the pebbles, you might slip and fall. So we have to pay attention to all the things in our lives and balance what's in our jar, how much we're willing to take on. And learn that stuff's going to happen too, because I was thinking about this jar, and I was thinking, you could pour water in here still, couldn't you? There are other things that could still go in here. There's air in here. There's space in here. There are other possibilities. There are different explanations about what you could do with this jar and how you can fill your life. So, what we need to do is be open and always asking questions and being curious about things we think we know for certain. Sometimes we think we know for certain the jar is full, and then something comes along and fills it up again. Thank you. So, speaking of filling up the jar, one of the things I love about this church is that once a month we donate our plate. We don't share part of it. We donate it to a cause that our social justice committee has chosen for us. And today I'm really excited to welcome up Erin from Chattanooga Room at the Inn.
She did a great job of not spilling anything. Mine
I
would
was
be
so nervous.
mine would be everywhere. Good morning, and thank you for having me this Easter morning. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? It's also a blessing to finally get to be seeing people in 3 dimensions and actually getting to speak to them. I've been here several times, so many of you have heard the message. For those of you who haven't, Chattanooga Room in the Inn is a program. It's a residential program, and we serve women and children who are experiencing homelessness. A lot of people think that we're a domestic violence shelter. They think we're an emergency shelter. Actually, we're like the next step for one of those. We do take women who have come from abusive backgrounds, and they're no longer in danger. And we do take people from the emergency shelter when they need that extra bit of time to get stable and into permanent housing. So at Room in the Inn, what we do is we admit women, we admit single women and moms. The moms come in and they get a case manager right away. They start working on some goals, and those goals have to do with many of the barriers to permanent housing that they have. It's all individualized. So the general areas are education, employment, finances, health, and housing. All of those areas can contain barriers that have kept them from maintaining permanent housing. So what we want them to do is learn how to overcome those barriers and learn how not to be homeless in the future. 86% of the women who have graduated from our program since 2006 remain permanently housed to date. They have not re-experienced homelessness. So our mission is to get them through that plan, the service plan, that so that they can save money, they can get employed, they can get their children's education stabilized. All the kids that are in our program that are school-aged will stay in the school that they were enrolled in at the time they became homeless. So that's one less loss they have to bear. And the women receive counseling. They can receive it on site, or they can receive specific trauma counseling. Trauma is a big thing for the people that we serve. The population that we serve have often been abused, and chronic abuse as a child really impacts their brain development. So their coping skills that they learn along the way in order to survive are what have led them to us. And it might be bad personal relationships, it might be choosing the wrong man. It takes all different forms. There's mental illness, there's substance abuse, and they are not restricted from coming into our program because of those. But what we really want them to do is address the trauma so that that isn't what keeps them from being able to do what they need to do in order to be stable and maintain permanent housing. I can give you guys some statistics. I can actually give you some numbers. 1, 5, and 26. 1 out of 45 children are experiencing homelessness in this country. 5 children who experience homelessness average 5 schools per school year. and 26% of the homeless population are made up of families. More numbers: 40, 48, 86. $40,000 is what it costs a community to serve a chronically homeless individual for 1 year. That is emergency room visits, it could include jail time, it could be mental health crisis, stabilization, emergency shelter. $4,800 is what it costs us to teach a woman how not to be homeless. That's a big savings to our community. Every time we get a graduate, we're like, ooh, we're saving the money. And then 80% or 86% of our graduates remain permanently housed to date. So when we have a woman who graduates, she is not going to become a chronically homeless individual and cost the community as much as it can. I would encourage all of you guys to come by for a tour sometime. We have a lot of volunteer opportunities, and they can range from helping us with the office, helping us in the front lobby with the door and the phone, or it could be working with the kids while the moms are in life skills classes or Bible study. So all you gotta do is call us, come by for a tour. We'd love to see you. We are next door to where the Humane Society used to be on Highland Park Avenue. So feel free to come by, and I appreciate you guys listening to me.
Thank you. So it's time for us to give generously to this wonderful organization. I've worked with homeless families before. I know how critical it is to get them back on their feet, and I know how hard it is to place them. Every bit you can give will be appreciated. If it's your first time, feel free to let the plate pass you by, but thank you for your generosity in advance. We're going to try something a little different in the offertory response, which is get to know the back of the order of service. We give these gifts freely, committed to our mission to care, create beloved community, awaken hearts and minds, resist injustice, and act with compassion, embrace life, and care for the earth. To this, we dedicate our offerings. Okay. So this is a multi-generational service, which means some folks of all ages are around, and I know that when I'm listening to somebody talk about rocks, it's helpful if I have a rock. So I want you to know that there is a box of rocks up here, and anyone is free to come get one for yourself, for everybody. You can have one. We're even going to do a little meditation about rocks, and you could be any age to get a rock if you'd like. So, as the racing rocks down the hill is a little different, thank you for handing them out to each other. All right, let's take a minute to hand out rocks. Yay! You didn't know there was going to be communion today, but it's rocks. We're just going to stir around and pick up rocks for a minute. I forgot to say who I am, so I'll say that. I am the Reverend Mandy Goheen. My pronouns are she, her, and it is my honor to serve a congregation that loves rocks. If you're at home today, go find a rock. You might want to have it in your hand. I love it. Rock is popular, right? All right, so rocks racing was introduced to me by my father, as I had told earlier, who got onto a rock at the top of the ridge and rode it all the way down. So when I heard there were sailing stones in this world, I wasn't terribly surprised. In the 1890s, about 100 years ago, a man went to the Death Valley, a place called the Racetrack Playa. He was looking for precious minerals, and instead, he came across trails across a dry lake with lines through them. But not just lines of one rock. There could be a rock 100 feet away from another rock that was moving in the same pattern. So he naturally did what we do, and he went home and told his wife, and she naturally did what we do, and she didn't believe him. And so the first person on the Racetrack Playa to really start experimenting was a woman, amen, and she marked where the rock was to see if it moved, and it did. Later, scientists came in and proved that it wasn't ice. Let me say more about that. This is in the middle of Death Valley, nowhere, very dry. And it snows or rains every once in a while. And this is a lake full of 1,000 feet of sediment. And these basalt rocks come from one end of the lake and go up the lake bed to the other end. And the whole thing is shaped like a racetrack. There's even a rock formation in the middle that looks a little bit like a grandstand. And so scientists went and they were going to prove that it wasn't ice, so they took stakes and put around the rock. Now, they had to bring in special rocks that they brought from home. They weren't allowed to vandalize any of the rocks that were there, so they brought the rocks that were basalt, and they drilled a hole and, did the experiment. Which is interesting to me because in the Bible story about Jesus, the women also go and discover the rock has moved. This is a heavy rock. They're shocked. They're kind of scared about it. It's a rock bigger than you think you could move, as are the rocks on the playa, which is the name of the dry lake. There are lots of theories about where Jesus went. My favorite in particular is called the swooning theory, which is that he probably was a doctor, which is not too hard for me to believe, probably a healer of not illness as much as a healer of the heart. He was healing things that people weren't allowed to go into the temple with. He was healing blindness and leprosy and bleeding and these things that didn't allow folks to go and celebrate being Jews at the time. It was very revolutionary to help these folks get in the door. And he was doing things like putting mud and spit on people's eyes. I will admit, that sounds a little bit like maybe not a traditional doctor of today, but some kind of a doctor. And he's already raised Lazarus from the dead, so he might know a little something about that, right, if you put it in this context. The first story in the Gospels is from Mark. The other Gospels were written to kind of copy. It's later. In this first Gospel, he says something interesting. I'm going to read it in a second, but there's this, go meet Jesus in Galilee, he's not here. There's no other Bible story that fills in that blank. This is just like this cliffhanger in the Bible that nobody really notices. So If that is so and Jesus is a doctor, perhaps somebody has taken him to Galilee. Now, it is also possible that his body was stolen. This is another theory. There is a possibility they said it was the Jewish people. This is pretty unlikely because it is the Sabbath, remember? And you're not going to touch something that won't allow you then to go into the temple. And that's why the women come the next day. And this is the story of the resurrection of Jesus from Mark. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Solomon, bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb?" And when they looked up, they saw the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised, and he is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go tell his disciples Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. So this, Bibles go through a lot of translations, but one of the things I love about Unitarian Universalism is exactly what I said, is we can question the pieces and the clues that we're given to understand this, not to take it for word of what we're reading, not for, as Thomas Starr King would have said, that if you're a Unitarian, you think you're too good to be damned, and if you're a Universalist, you think that God's too good to damn you. Not that exactly. But to question from both sides of our religious tradition. To reject an idea that we are so bad that somebody needed to die to fix that. And to find other meaning in that story for us. And to not reject it, but to be curious about maybe there are some other answers that we just don't get yet. That's hard, right? Not getting stuff. We like answers. We like the scientific method. I talk about it all the time. It gives me comfort to understand the details. It has a little bit to do with my background. I have an undergraduate in forensic science. Who knew? It does come in handy every once in a while. And family studies. Those together are cool. So in forensic science, we learned there are no coincidences. We learned that there is some clues there that tell us what the answer is, what the context is. And a lot of people get this wrong just by simply taking it out of context. So let's go back to the context of the rock. Many of you have a rock. I invite you into something called Pebble Meditation by Martha Kirby Capo. So get comfortable. If you have a rock, you can hold it in your hand. If you're comfortable closing your eyes, that's cool. If not, you can just look at your rock or have a soft gaze. Feet flat on the ground. Let your body rest easily against the back of your chair. It's okay if there are noises in the background. That is life. Relax. Breathe soft and easy. In the next several minutes, I will ask you to give yourself the gift of time. Time for your spirit to lay down its burden. Time for your thoughts to ease away from each other, creating pockets of silence between the noise of their passing. Time for your body to simply rest. Imagine you are on a beach. Imagine the sound of waves. You sit at the foaming edge of land and liquid, watching the rhythms of the waves, watching the water transmit the energy of the wind traveling over it, watching that energy crest across the barriers of sand and pebbles. Some pebbles are larger than others, only shift gently in place as the water sluices around them. Others, smaller, more agile, seem to chase the backwash as the water ebbs away, only to be returned more or less to where they began. Sometimes we are boulders at the water's edge, absorbing the water's energy in stoic strength, standing solid and unmovable, defiant and unyielding as the water churns around us. Sometimes we are rocks, stubborn, slow to be moved, sluggish in our response to the tides pushing and pulling. Sometimes we are pebbles, tumbling helter-skelter, higgly-piggly-pop, overwhelmed and unable to resist the breaking waves and the sucking backwash that we just can't seem to get away from. And sometimes we are sand with an infinite capacity to accept and absorb and transmit energies breaking against us, able to allow those energies to pass through us, through the pockets of silence, of space, of peace within us. What are you today? A boulder, a rock, a pebble, sand, all at the same time? What is the energy that is swirling around you? How is that changing you? How is that energy changed by your intentions with it, your interactions? In every breath, in every curving muscle and ligament, in every pulse and rhythm you experience, there is a story of you, of who you were, who you are now, and who you choose to be, of how you choose to be connected to all that is, a story that is still being written by you. Now take a deep breath. Let's take another. And gently come back into the room, your feet flat on the ground, your body resting easy against the back of your chair, your hands gently opening, looking at your rock. There is lots of sand and pebbles in our lives, working at the rocks that we are. And there's a tradition in this church that if we have something in our heart that is bothering us, something that we want to celebrate, something that is making us terribly happy, confused, irritated, all the things, we invite you to come and light a candle for that thing, to put it someplace else, to put it in the care of this community. I invite you forward now to light a candle for joys or concerns. And I lit some extra candles for the things that folks at home might have in their heart and things that maybe you're not yet ready to bring forward. Ooh, now we feel like we're in science class. You're like, thank goodness she's moving on. So, why do these rocks move in the Playa racetrack in Death Valley? Well, it's not ice. They proved it because the ones inside the stakes moved it. They moved, but they didn't both move. Or is it ice? Turns out these two cousins get pretty obsessed with this question. And they start setting up GPS monitors in rocks. They drill holes in the rocks that they bring, of course. And put GPS, they put a weather station there, and they put cameras. And they don't know how long it's going to take for this to happen. Because you see, the rocks moving in the racetrack playa are affected by climate change. It's happening less and less and less often as the world warms and they get even less rain in Death Valley. Death Valley, specifically, this place is called, it's in the rain shadow of the Sierra, so it barely gets any rain. And it is desolate. It takes, I put it in the GPS. It would take 33 hours to drive there. Okay, we're not going to do that. Maybe like 182 to bike. I might have looked it all up. But it's a long, long walk, trust me. And you need to make sure you have a spare tire if you're driving. It's pretty amazing. I posted a video in the newsletter. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to open the newsletter and watch it. It's called Physics Girl, and she is amazing. I love a good story about science anyway, and she's a great storyteller. And she goes out to the playa, meets these two cousins who've solved the mystery. They've set all the stuff up, and they're waiting for however many years for it to happen. They're thinking it could be 10 years before a rock moves. Oddly, and they were excited that only 2 years later, which for me, I would have been doing something else by then, only 2 years later, it happened. There was a storm. They were there, the cousins, but they were on the wrong part of the lake and they didn't see it. But they heard it. They heard the sound of like tinkling glass. It was the ice. The ice was moving. And they went to see and investigate, and it wasn't big, thick sheets of ice. It was quarter-inch thick, glassy ice on top of about 3 inches of water. And it wasn't just ice either. It was wind. They expected with their weather station to find that hurricane-force winds had blown through and moved the rocks. It was the only explanation. He explained it as it was the kind of wind that would have blown your hat off, but it wasn't a hurricane. And it would move these sheets of ice that were hundreds and hundreds of feet across the shallow water uphill because it was forming ice shovels and moving the rocks. Everything had to be exactly right for that to happen. The sediment had to be wet. There had to be the right temperature outside. The wind had to be blowing particularly right. In 100 years of experiments, these guys finally solved it, but the joke was on them just a little bit. A girl in southern Germany also solved it for her science fair project the same year. And she proved that it was true, and it was really fun because they became involved with each other. And the scientists talked to her, and she won all kinds of awards and stuff. It was pretty neat. And then they started getting all these emails and stuff after the experiment about other rocks around the world that were moving at the bottom of lake beds or in Lake Erie when the ice freezes and moves up onto the land in the winter. It's an ice shovel. So how do we know what happened to move that rock at that tomb? How do we know for sure that all the conditions weren't exactly right? It certainly changed a lot of things, didn't it? It certainly changed the world. And as I said, we're quite kind of cool with Christmas. We can get down with that. But Easter gives us a hard time. Especially when, like I said, we believe in the inherent goodness of people, not that we would have a God that would create a mistake in the first place. We don't need salvation from being inherently bad. We come from a place of inherent goodness, of curiosity. When you're curious, it gives you access to that inherent goodness. When you think you know something for sure and reject it, you can get into a little bit of fundamental thinking. So when we, as Unitarian Universalists, should not keep going around saying that this thing didn't happen. We should instead be curious and look at the details and see how it impacted us. Yes, Jesus of Nazareth was killed by empire, not to save me. He was a political activist, maybe a doctor. That's one theory, like I said. It's possible that he was in some kind of coma and woke up. Now, that's still a pretty big rock to move. I have moved a barn beam that rolled onto my cousin. We get adrenaline sometimes, don't we? We can do like amazing things. Like I picked the beam up and moved it off of him. He wasn't really squished. It was fine. We should have not been in the woodpile, all the things. But it is, in my current understanding of what happened on that Easter morning, that Jesus had a community of people. And in the gospel, it already told us. He told you he was going to meet you in Galilee. But in the current state of everything, the chaos of his murder and people running around trying to figure out what to do, they panicked. Maybe they forgot. And there's always another part to this story. There's always the part where this gives us an invitation on Easter to live into our curiosity and to not reject things fundamentally just because we don't have the specific scientific answer today. If we give up on things, it would just be like those guys not doing the extra experiments in the racetrack playa, just saying, oh, it was ice and leaving it at that. That's our message for Easter. Don't just take things at face value. Dig deeper. And even if they're not real for you, even if you think it's an imaginary story, still find meaning and respect in the people that it's meaningful for. I laugh when we come up to light candles. I grew up Catholic, and growing up, nobody ever told me there was a choice about believing any of this. Right? You just did. That's just, of course. And we were lighting the candles today, and every time, 15 years of Unitarian Universalist Easter Sunday services, I still fight the urge to walk forward to light the candle with my hands like this. Because that's what we did when we came up for communion in Catholic Church. And if I get in a line with people, I just do the thing. Right? So I always am like, what do you do with your hands when you're just going to light a candle? So I don't know. I was never very well behaved in church, and I remember always questioning this story. And I always remember getting poked by my grandma when the women are the ones that shared the good news. And I love the little connection between the man's wife doing the first experiment on the racetrack playa. I think that creative, nurturing curiosity is what we need in this world. And just not to give up on anything we think we know is certain. Keep exploring, keep questioning, be smart about it. Lean in to the possibilities. May it be so, and blessed be. Our closing song, you are welcome to rise in body and or spirit, both here or at home. Lo, the day of days is here. Closing Words for Easter by Alex Holt. For all those who celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, may this day be another affirmation of divine love and promise. For all of those who see the eternal story of new spring and life beginning anew, may you breathe deeply of a season of promise and hope. For all who are experiencing despair or hopelessness in this Easter, may you find in the darkness or depression a doorway to light and warmth that offers you freedom. For all of us together, we can do what no one isolated person can do. Rolling the heavy stone aside reminds us we are far more powerful than we ever could be on our own. Our offering of strong hands to help and pray make this real. From this moment forth, let's begin again in love. And it is time to extinguish our chalice, and that is in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but keep the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and share with all the world. And there are some announcements. So there is no Beloved Cafe tonight. We're having Easter dinner at my house. Well, if you want to come. Whoops. Sorry. If you don't have anywhere to go, let me know. Anyway, last time we had Beloved Cafe, we did a restorative listening circle on April 3rd, and we raised $110 for the Ukraine. So I just want to thank all of those who participated and donated. If you're having an issue receiving our weekly newsletter, let the office know immediately. We have found that some of our dear friends and members have not been getting our newsletter during pandemic, and we want to fix that as soon as possible. There is something in the works called the Connection Campaign. And I want you to mark your calendars. I know you have your phones in your pockets. For Thursday, April 28th at 6 p.m. This is for anyone interested in joining the church as an official member. And they're invited to come, but everyone's invited to come. We're going to be connecting. We'll have a short UU 101 presentation. And time for connection, we're going to play games and bingo and talk to each other. It's going to be about 2 hours, and it'll be time to meet some folks that maybe you haven't met before. It'll be a fun way to get reconnected in this community and reestablish our sense of belonging. So everyone's invited. It's going to be fun. More on that. The stewardship campaign is also part of that, but kind of a side piece. That sounded awful. Another part, another part. I'm glad it's announcements at least. Okay, composure. Another part, and there's going to be, not next week, but the week after, you'll start seeing a giant 70th anniversary gift box where your pledge cards can get dropped in. It'll be super fun. So also a little bit about stewardship. It has been tradition to do a very long stewardship campaign, 6 to 8 weeks. And we've decided to have a flash campaign because it's faster and we just now got our act together. So both reasons, I'll just be honest. If you're interested in helping with any of that, let me know immediately. There is also a little fun scheduled for after church. Do you want me just to say?
No, I wouldn't mind. I'll just let everybody know.
Here. You got to let people know all over the world.
Hey, if you're here with a young person, or if you are a young person, or if you're young at heart, then we are going to have an egg hunt out in the playground yard there. So if anyone would like to participate in that, you can meet us up here by the benches where we've got some bags for you to go out and collect with just outside the doors there. And we'll gather there together, and then we'll set everybody loose at the same time. So if you'd like to participate in the egg hunt after the service, please come and meet us. Afterwards, also, we're going to have sidewalk chalk drawing competition. And yes, there are ribbons for first, second, third, and honorable mention.
Why do you look at me when he said honorable mention? We have a minister's ribbon, too. Who signed up to do coffee? You already have an apron, Andre. Who signed up? Who loves this apron? Oh, you pointed. Christian and Selena. Selena, you get a prize. Yay! You don't say that out loud. You just make us all think our taste buds are weird. Anyone else want an apron? Yes. Well, okay. You have to make coffee.
Don't make the coffee count.
Oh, okay. I have 2 more of these beautiful aprons. One is actually going to go to someone else who I deeply appreciate, who works in our kitchen, who I will not embarrass on the stage right now. But you will see her get it. But if you want to join out in the kitchen and make coffee, it is such a great way to get to know people around here. It was the first thing I ever volunteered for in my church, and I got to meet people and hang out, and it was a good time. Plus, we love to promote coffee. It is an important part of our spiritual tradition. Thank you all so much. Oh, wait, you have a, speaking of coffee, oh, yes, speaking of coffee.
I'm actually going to wear this coming Wednesday. And if you're here at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, you get to see me in it. Although if you're here, I'll expect you to do the cooking. But I will serve the coffee at least. But anyway, we're going to have our second coffee time, midweek coffee time, otherwise known as the first and third Wednesday coffee time, because it's the third Wednesday coming up. And we had a great time. On the first time we met, it was a kind of wild and crazy crew, but we had a very good time. This coming Wednesday, we're going to be continuing with lessons from the garden, and I'm going to bring you a bunch of plants from my native plant habitat. So feel free to come. All ages are welcome. anybody's welcome to come and have coffee. I'll bring some crackers and cookies and other things, finger foods. If you'd like to bring something too, please do. But that's Wednesday, 10 to 12. I'm Selena. If you want to ask me about it after the service, I will be here. Thank you.
I went last time for 3 minutes because as soon as I got here, the school called to, as they do. But it was such a great conversation. I really encourage folks who are free during the day to come to that. I really appreciate you, Selena, for doing that, and it was just really a good place to connect. I want to thank you all for coming to Unitarian Universalist Church on an Easter Sunday morning, because you never know what you're going to hear, honestly. I appreciate each of you, and I hope that you take the curiosity and scientific inquiry out into the world with you and use it to make you feel better about some of the stuff people believe in that you don't quite get. Always, you can come here to seek. If you ever have a question or want to have a deep conversation about rocks, I am here for you, always. Thank you so much for coming today, and have a wonderful Easter Sunday.